A couple pranksters get what's coming to them, and two men fall in love with a sexy sea monster. These frightening flops may have been crapped on by the critics, but they deserve a second look. The eighth installment in a horror franchise that was never particularly beloved by critics was always going to fight an uphill battle for respectability. That being said, people really disliked Friday the 13th Part 8, Jason Takes Manhattan. It has the unfortunate distinction of being the second lowest rated Friday the 13th entry on Rotten Tomatoes, scoring a paltry 11% fresh rating. Although the film promises the hockey mask slashers stalking the streets of the Big Apple, the majority of the film takes place on a ship headed to New York. Honestly, the title should probably be something more along the lines of Jason Takes a Boat to Manhattan. And while that may have been a valid complaint at the time, it has been over 30 years since the film's release. And now that we know most of the movie doesn't take place in Manhattan, it's time to admit that the film is incredibly fun. Kane Hodder makes a great Jason. He's hulking and wet, swollen and grotesque from his years of rotting underwater. From a neon-lit disco chase scene to a goofy number with a rocker chick ending up on the wrong end of her guitar, the kills that take place on the boat are awesome. Once Jason finally does get to Manhattan, the movie's vision of New York is an ultra-80s delight. Punks roam the streets, graffiti covers the subways, and barrels of toxic waste fill the alleyways. The only thing missing is the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles.
You don't understand. There is a maniac trying to kill us. Welcome to New York.
To top it all off, the film has one of the most humorously over-the-top kills in all of horror cinema, when Jason punches someone's head clean off their shoulders. Horror took on a mean streak in the 2000s, with films like the Saw franchise pushing the limits of cinematic gore with graphic depictions of torture. At the time, many critics were understandably not quite on board with the trend. In the years since, though, some critics have re-evaluated the movement, situating it in a post-9/11 culture curious about what torture looked like. After all, we were embroiled in a national conversation about the morality of enhanced interrogation techniques. One film that deserves a reappraisal is Carter Smith's 2008 shocker, The Ruins. The film sits at only 49% fresh on Rotten Tomatoes, but to many fans, it's the best of the bunch. Yes, the gore is over the top, but to call it gratuitous suggests that it's without purpose. Instead, the gore and the discomfort it inspires is the point. The film involves a group of ignorant American tourists who visit ruins they were warned to stay away from, only to find themselves trapped by an eerie, sentient species of vine that crawls inside them while they sleep and mimics noises. Their only recourse is to operate on one another, slicing the vines from underneath their skin. Equal parts gross and deeply unsettling, it's a perfect metaphor for an America tearing itself apart to root out terrorism. Bob Clark's classic slasher Black Christmas predated Halloween by several years, and it may have even been a direct inspiration. The chiller follows a murderer who terrorizes a group of girls stuck at a sorority house over the holidays. The movie received mixed reviews when it was first released, but by the time it was remade in 2006, its influence on the genre was widely accepted. Critics tend to look down on remakes, and Black Christmas only managed to scrounge up a paltry 16% fresh rating on Rotten Tomatoes. Sure, it's not the original, which is atmospheric and weird in a way that's hard to match. However, once we get past that, 2006's Black Christmas is worth a watch for anyone willing to accept that a remake in a gritty 2000s style should be allowed to do its own thing. The slasher film seems to be making a comeback nowadays thanks to recent hits like Freaky and X, not to mention new installments of classic franchises like Halloween, Hellraiser, and Scream. Just a few years ago, however, the idea of a new original R-rated slasher felt like an oddity. Released in 2018, Hellfest feels like a movie from a different time, when studios pumped out dozens of these things a year. That being said, audiences didn't particularly notice or care. It barely cracked $5 million in its opening weekend, and it sits at 39% fresh on Rotten Tomatoes. Many critics pointed out that Hellfest doesn't offer anything new to the slasher genre, which at that time felt played out and outdated. However, that's not necessarily a bad thing. For a certain audience, a competently executed slasher is satisfying by its own right. In fact, after decades of self-aware, self-referential slashers like Scream, it's downright refreshing to see a movie like Hellfest that's content to simply deliver the kills and scares. This story takes place in an amusement park on Halloween. Real-world theme park horror nights like this require a suspension of disbelief, a willingness to wonder what it would be like if that's not a park employee with a chainsaw, but an actual killer intent on slicing and dicing his way through the masses. Hellfest leans into that fear. It's nothing groundbreaking, but it sure is a fun movie. The 2016 horror film Don't Hang Up wasn't necessarily critically panned so much as it was critically ignored. Most seem to agree that the characters are unlikable, and that the film's killer seems to have unexplained powers over the situation. Those are both true, but in our opinion, the unlikability of the main characters is what makes the movie so effective. Don't Hang Up is about two friends, Sam and Brady, who do pranks for their YouTube channel. And by pranks, we mean cruel practical jokes.
Very sorry to inform you that you've been pranked.
They call people on the phone and give them horrific news, like pretending that someone's wife has died in a terrible car accident. As the person on the other end of the line understandably has a meltdown, they film the conversation, cackling over their victim's anguish. One person, however, warns them, don't hang up. He calls himself Mr. Lee, and he has kidnapped their families. And if they don't do what he says, their families will die. The movie is full of simmering homoerotic tension between the two lead characters, playing into the way straight men can act out violently as a way to release other urges. Yeah, they're awful people, which makes it supremely satisfying to watch justice be served, even if it's in the form of a psychopathic killer terrorizing them in their home. Cold Skin seems to have no idea what kind of movie it wants to be, and it's all the better for it. Simultaneously a horror movie, an action thriller, and an interspecies romance, Cold Skin offers a bit of something for everyone. And in doing so, it wound up polarizing critics. This movie is about two men on an island in the Antarctic Circle, stuck in a lighthouse where they are besieged nightly by creatures from the sea. Blue humanoid monsters swarm the building in the darkness and must be beaten back, and the fight might just be driving the men insane. One day, one of the men learns that his fellow lighthouse caretaker has befriended one of the creatures. She's oddly beautiful, with her bright shining eyes and graceful body utterly captivating the men. Soon enough, they begin to compete for her attention. Many critics felt that the film didn't necessarily have a point of view or anything interesting to say about its subject matter. That's okay though. It feels at times like a hangout movie, just an excuse to spend some time in a gorgeous yet frightening location with some intriguing personalities. It's a creature feature, and one that's more interested in developing an arresting emotional tone rather than focusing solely on the plot. Go in expecting that, and you may find yourself swept away. Released in the wake of the Vietnam War, the Manson family murders, and the Kent State Massacre, Tobe Hooper's The Texas Chainsaw Massacre reflects an America headed down a dark path. Serving as a direct follow-up to the original, Netflix's legacy sequel ditches the franchise's convoluted continuity. In this one, we've reached the end of the road, quite literally. The 2022 Texas Chainsaw Massacre takes place on a dead-end street that serves as the only main road in a dusty, forgotten ghost town. Is Americana reduced to a shell of its former self? Sally Hardesty and her brother once walked through a vibrant field of sunflowers here, but now they're all wilted, scorched under a southern sky that's only going to keep getting warmer. As many critics noted, some attempts at modernizing the franchise land with a thud. One bit where someone threatens to cancel Leatherface is particularly embarrassing.
Try anything you cancel, bro.
But given the film's contemporary setting, some of that can be forgiven. Our young people aren't necessarily being sent to die in a war on the other side of the world. Instead, the main character is a school shooting survivor, so a character like Leatherface might not have the same impact as he did in the 70s. Plus, some of the kills are incredible. Directly following the line about cancellation is one of the goriest, over-the-top scenes of chainsaw mayhem in the entire franchise. As messy as it is, it's hard not to respect Texas Chainsaw Massacre. If we're reclaiming 2000s remakes, let's start with Jaume Collet-Serra's version of House of Wax. The movie shares its title with the 1953 Vincent Price film, but other than the basics of an evil wax museum where people get trapped inside wax figures, the two have little to do with one another. Instead, this one is about a group of teens headed to a football game who wind up trapped in a small town that features a titular House of Wax. By 2000 standards, the cast is stellar. In addition to stars like Chad Michael Murray, Elisha Cuthbert, and Jared Padalecki, Paris Hilton appeared in it at the height of her tabloid fame. Hilton's presence provided the film with an unforgettable marketing tagline: "See Paris Die." Many critics at the time faulted the film for being cruel and vicious. However, if we approach House of Wax believing that those can be good qualities in a horror film, it easily succeeds. The kills are deranged, the performances are as solid as you could want from a teen slasher, and the whole thing is stylishly directed by Collet-Serra, who would go on to helm modern horror classics like Orphan and The Shallows. Come to see Paris die, but stick around for everything else the film has to offer, and we promise you won't be disappointed. Brian Bertino's 2008 chiller, The Strangers, is a movie concerned mostly with atmosphere. It tells the story of a couple at home alone who realize that masked strangers are lurking outside their house, watching their every move.
Why are you doing this to us?
Because you were home.
It's a supremely spooky endeavor that generated its thrills not necessarily from shocking violence, but from the creepiness of noticing a shadow down a hallway. The Strangers Prey at Night arrived a full decade later, and it has little interest in trying to recapture the tone of the original. Unsurprisingly, many critics were disappointed by that. The movie stands at 39% fresh on Rotten Tomatoes, with many complaining the series traded atmosphere for action. They're not wrong. If you're looking to recapture the experience of watching The Strangers, your best bet is to hit rewind and watch it again. However, if you're looking for something new, The Strangers Prey at Night is a lot of fun. This time, the masked strangers stalk a family in a trailer park. Prey at Night goes for pure 80s slasher thrills, and it more than delivers. One sequence at a public pool ringed with neon palm trees is the best scene in both movies. Director Johannes Roberts, who helmed 47 Meters Down and its sequel, knows how cool blood looks against rippling blue water, and the whole chase is set to Bonnie Tyler's Total Eclipse of the Heart. If this is what the sequel wants to be, we're more than happy to let it.